Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a show that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a special guest. She's an author, painter, journalist, served as a news correspondent for ABC TV in Washington, D.C. She knew many presidents. Her husband was a congressman. In addition to that, in 1990, she founded the MaryAnne Foundation to foster world peace through spiritual means. But today we're going to focus on her book, From the White House to the White Cross. What's the White Cross? We're going to talk about that. She had an exciting life, and then things took a turn. In part 2 of the book, she gets into the spiritual journey, which is very exciting. And I'm just so happy to have Mrs. Peggy Stanton with us today. This book is available at shopmercy.org, code WHWC. Mrs. Stanton, it's a great joy to have you with us today on Mercy Unbound.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. When you were at the Cleveland Clinic as a doctor, we may have been in the same building and never saw one another. My husband had a number of successful sessions at the Cleveland Clinic. We think highly of it.
You know, it's interesting is reading your book. There are many things in your life that are kind of similar to mine in a sense. You mentioned in your book Congressman Delbert Latta. He was my congressman when I grew up near Findlay, Ohio, in my town. Brother Leonard from the Marians, Sister Isabel Bitwee, and you love Our Lady, the Message of Divine Mercy. We're going to get into your art. I mean, you've done it all.
How did you know Brother Leonard?
Brother Leonard, well, our ministry, of course, is under the Marians of the Immaculate Conception. So I knew all those guys up there. And Brother Leonard and I collaborated on some talks, and, you know, we spoke together. And yeah, wonderful. Always treated me. He's a wonderful man.
Yes, he was. Yes, I knew him well in Washington and worked with him on things.
But you've had an amazing life, and you know, the story is everybody has a story. What led you to write this book?
You know, it was written over a long period of years because I kept journals when I would go on trips with my husband. The work he was in, whether it was Congress or the World Bank, involved a great deal of world travel, and I went with him, and often we took our daughter with us. And so I wrote journals on all these trips because it's just part of my DNA to be a storyteller, and there was just too much rich material that I couldn't leave it on the streets of Paris or Rome or Havana. And so I would write them, and then I would tuck them in a drawer and leave them there. But people would often say to me, you know, I wish you'd write a story. I wish you'd write an article about this or that. And occasionally I did, you know, for the Washington Post or some magazine. I'd publish what I had written. And all those things accumulated over the years. And when I went to Medjugorje, of course, that was the most exciting part of my life. People won't believe that. Everybody thinks that Washington and New York and Paris are the most exciting things. Nothing was like the excitement of really getting to know the King of the Universe, which is what happened in Medjugorje. And that's where some adventures really began. War zones and all kinds of things that I never, thank God, had to cover a war when I was in broadcasting for ABC. But I did because of Medjugorje. So anyway, I think eventually what I just didn't want to, frankly, I didn't want to write a book that was about me. I wanted, because I'd always written about other people or broadcast about other people. But it dawned on me that that the lessons a person learns from an experience like Medjugorje and the conversion that took place is important to share with the next generation. And so that was in my mind that I would write it just for put together all these stories just for my grandchildren. And I had written a number of books and published a number of books, but this I didn't take to a publisher. I just thought I'll just self-publish this and give it to my grandchildren. And I happened to be, when I had my radio show, I had Father Chris Alar of the Marians on the show with Father Jason. They had written a book, and I just happened to casually mention it. And as I mentioned it, Father Chris said, "Could we take a look at that?" And I said, "Well, sure." So they took a look at it and said they would like to publish it, and that's how it became a published book. That's a long answer to a short question.
Interesting story, though. Let's go back to your early days. In your book, you started out talking about Nancy Dickerson. That's a name I remember.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in your book, you said something to the effect of, "That's exactly what I want to do."
Yeah.
Set you on fire a little bit. What was it like trying to break into the news business, being a young woman back then, many years ago?
Oh, well, it wasn't easy because there were almost no women really in the television news business. Certainly, there were women journalists, in the written word, but not in television or radio. And it was very male dominated. Um, so I think it became uh, the de rigueur that maybe to integrate your newsroom, you'd have one woman and one black. We used to joke about that, one black, one woman, and now you have an integrated newsroom. So that's what happened in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when I graduated from Marquette University. And I knew exactly, as I said, what I wanted to do. But I ultimately wanted to be covering national news in Washington, as Nancy Dickerson was doing. So I got my start in a local CBS affiliate newsroom in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Um, and my first assignment it wasn't really an assignment. I was just literally in the newsroom getting coffee for the people who were on the air, writing their stories or filing. I just anything to get you in the newsroom was the idea. So one day, um, all the men were out on stories, and in every newsroom is what we used to call a squawk box, but it announces police uh, arrests, etc., fires, and so forth and so on, so that the newsroom knows where they need to cover the next story. So they announced, and there was nobody in the newsroom but me. And I heard them announce a murder in downtown Milwaukee about 10 a.m. in the morning. I mean, murders are always news, especially if they're in the morning. And so I grabbed a cameraman and I just went on my own, went down. And when I brought the film back, they had a good time teasing me, saying she interviewed everyone but the bar stool. So that was my very first story. And from then on, I was on the air.
Now you went to Washington and you mentioned President Lyndon Johnson, Vice President Hubert Humphrey. What was all that like as a young woman?
Yeah, well, somewhat intimidating because I was just in my mid 20s. But on the other hand, there was a certain advantage to it because you were such a rare commodity. Um, People paid more attention to you. And I don't know whether they felt sorry for this young girl or But it, it was fairly easy to get an interview with him. And I found that both LBJ, Hubert Humphrey, they were very kind and very nice to this little fledgling reporter.
Now, you eventually met and then married Congressman Stanton, and there were a lot of dignitaries at your wedding. And I'm trying to set the stage here to give people an idea what your life was like, and then we're going to get into Medjugorje because
Mm.
your whole vision changed, so to speak. But what
Right.
was that like at the wedding? Who were some of the people that were there?
Um, President Ford he wasn't president then. He was then minority leader in the House of Representatives. He was there. Ethel Kennedy was there. There, it was, and of course, my real dignitaries, I think, were just lots of friends came from Ohio, and they had their own bus that took them all around Washington. And it was a big wedding. I think there were about 300 people there. And it would, definitely there was some glamour to it because people were, everybody could still remember when Jack Kennedy was in the Senate, and Jackie, she was an inquiring photographer. Sure, her work was different, but she went around and with a still camera and asked questions, I guess. So people remember. So in many ways, people were thinking, now the congressman and the correspondent. So there was a lot of publicity about that, but and that was fun and um, kind of a vain fun, really.
You mentioned in your book about the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. I
Hmm.
remember, I think I was in our church hall when a friend of mine said, "Did you see Bobby Kennedy's been shot?" Um, that was a
Yeah,
sad time in America, wasn't it?
it was very sad, and it was personally sad because Bill's roommate in at Georgetown University was Bobby Kennedy's brother-in-law.
Oh, Shriver.
So, no, no, no. His Rush Skakel was
Okay.
Ethel's brother.
Yeah.
And they were roommates and they were lifelong friends. And when they were in college together, uh, Bobby was at the University of Virginia, I think, and Rush and my husband Bill were at Georgetown University. And uh, they would take the train every weekend. They'd go back to the Connecticut, where the Skakel house was, the mansion was there. And the train would, I guess it would start, maybe it started in Virginia and then would come through Washington, and Bobby and Bill and Rush would take the train up to Connecticut for the weekend. So they knew each other since my husband knew Bobby from the time they were all in college together. And so it was, you know, a very sad, sad time. And I had gotten to know him fairly well, because I'd interviewed him a number of times and I'd been out to their house on Hickory Hill. So it was indeed very sad. Um, and we were at the funeral, and um, we did not ride the train. There was a 10-hour train ride. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Where they took the train from Washington or from New York, where the mass was at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and they took the train all the way through, and people were lined up outside watching the train go by, and it finally got to Arlington Cemetery late at night. We were all waiting, wondering if it was going to make it, but it was a very sad time. But I must say, I think I wrote that chapter because I was very impressed with Ethel Kennedy's faith. I mean, she was remarkable the way she held up through that, and it was basically her faith that
Right.
carried her.
Right. Now, you mentioned some of the people you've met in your life, Pope John Paul, Salvador Dali. Um,
Mhm.
the list,
Quite a combination, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
quite an
Paul.
extensive list as well. President Bush, Fidel Castro. Um, but I want to kind of transition into the next part of the book. You wrote in the book, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it hit me like a sledgehammer when you basically summed it up and said, you know, you had a wonderful life, but you realized that all that was not the meat of what the Lord really wanted from us.
Hmm.
He wants our hearts and to love him, and your spiritual journey was the meat of it. And
Yeah,
that hit me.
yeah. Yes, the real, as I said earlier, the real excitement, I think, happened in my life when our Lord, shall we say, manifested himself in a um, very clear and decisive way. And that took place in Medjugorje. And then once you start to follow him, your life really does take on a lot of twists and turns you never expected. And many are exciting, many aren't, many are just profound and deep. And I've used the word reassuring. I think uh, the greatest thing about having our Lord in your life in a very, I shouldn't use the word, I guess, visible way, but in a very tangible way, uh, and so that he's in your life hour by hour, is the great comfort and solace you have when you're undergoing some really difficult trial. Uh, Somehow you just know that he doesn't cause these things to happen, but he allows them. And if he allows them because he knows something very good will come out of it. And if you stay with him and close to him throughout this trial, that it will become apparent to you what better thing could be happening in your life.
Walk us through how you got to Medjugorje, because that probably wasn't first on your list of places to go.
No, no, it was not. Indeed. Anne Buckley, who was the wife of former Senator James Buckley, Jim Buckley of New York. His brother Bill Buckley was probably better known because he was on television all the time. But Jim Buckley was a remarkable man. He was a senator. He was a judge. He was at one point head of Voice of America. And during that period, when he was head of Voice of America, his wife Anne went to Medjugorje, and Anne was uh, she was a delightful, very attractive, tennis playing Connecticut woman, if you know what I mean. And so she was not a woman that um, was on, you would picture on bended knee all the time. And so when she called me and said, Peggy, I want to tell you about this place, um, Medjugorje. I couldn't even pronounce it. Who? Medja what? And so she came over to my house and she told me all about Medjugorje. And I said, well, what do you do there? And she said, well, you pray. I said, 8 hours? What do you, all day? And she said, yes, she said, but it doesn't seem like a long time when you're there. And so she gave me a couple of books she wanted me to read, and on Medjugorje, and I put them on my nightstand, and there they were for about 2 years. And I was speaking but surprisingly, I back up to say, surprisingly, lots of people in Washington, D.C. we're hearing about Medjugorje. There was even, ABC had a documentary on it, believe it or not. And I was no longer working with ABC. It was on the cover of Life or Look magazine, and so forth. So anything that's news in Washington, people are paying attention. And you'd hear about the miracle, the sun was spinning, rosaries were turning gold, the cross on the white cross that I refer to in my title was reported growing twice its size before people's eyes and lighting up at night without benefit of electricity. Well, you know, I would tell these stories to my daughter, Kelly, who was 20 years old, just to bolster her faith. No way did I have in mind going there. And finally, one day she said, Mom, we should go there. And I said, Go? Go? That's a communist country. And she said, Well, Mom, we go every place else. And we had taken her, she'd been to China, she'd been to Africa. And my husband said, Listen, if she wants to have a spiritual experience, you can't deny her. And I said, But the church hasn't given approval to this. How do we know that's true? Um, but one time we were at I think an embassy meeting of something, and the apostolic delegate, uh, Archbishop Piolagi, an Italian, was there and I asked him about it, and he said to me, "The finger of God is there." He said, "We are looking at it very seriously." He said, "People go there and they come back different people." So after all this pressure, I said a little prayer. I'd never ever asked for a sign. I don't think I had ever asked God for a sign. So, but I thought I need one this time. I said, Lord, Kelly said, my daughter said that she only had the time between um, July 31st and the first week in August, August 7th. That's all the time zone she had available to go. Well, she's saying this 2 weeks before July 31st. So I really thought I was pretty safe, Doctor.
Yeah.
I won't be able to find any. I had no idea who went or how they went or what. But I heard about a travel agency in Cleveland, Ohio that was um, giving tours. So I called up and they said, oh, no, 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 no. We have nothing, absolutely nothing available. So I'm greatly relieved. I call my daughter and I say, gee, I'm sorry, dear. I tried, but there is nothing available at that time. Uh, so I'm thinking I'm off the hook, and then I'm on a Sunday, following Sunday, I'm walking out of Holy Trinity Church in Georgetown, and I hear a woman say she's going to Medjugorje um, for the Feast of the Assumption, which is August 15th. And I said, How are you getting there? And she named the agency. It was in Bethesda, Maryland. And I called up and I said, Do you have any pilgrimages available or any seats available on that pilgrimage? It was beyond the time Kelly said, but only by a week. So I thought, well, maybe she could go, even though I was hoping I would get a negative response. And the woman said, Oh, absolutely not. She said, We're booked solid. I said, I'm just curious, how far ahead are you booked to go to Medjugorje? She said, We're booked all the way into November. Oh, so I said, out of some kind of guilt or whatever, I said, Well, if you happen to get any dropouts on that August 15th pilgrimage, call me. So a couple hours later, she called me back and she said, You didn't ask me about this pilgrimage, but We have 2 seats available on a pilgrimage that's leaving July 31st and coming back August 7th, which was the exact right date that Kelly wanted. And I said, how can that be? I said, you're booked all the way into November and you suddenly have seats on a plane that's leaving in a week or two. She said, uh, she said, you know, we thought we were totally booked on this pilgrimage, but we just uncovered 2 seats we didn't know we had. So, as the priest said to me, Peggy, I don't know what bigger sign you want.
Yeah.
So that's how we got there.
What were some of the spiritual things that happened to you and Kelly on that trip? And a part two to that would be if you look at your life prior to Medjugorje, we all think we're, good Catholics going to mass, and
Hmm.
this kind of stirred the pot on you, didn't it? And kind of made you realize that you need to turn it up a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, right. You need to up your game. Um, Actually, I said to myself, gee, if I hadn't gone to Medjugorje, I might have gone to hell. Even though I thought I was a you think you're a good person. I go to church I've never missed mass on Sunday, put my money in the basket. But then I realized how little, it wasn't until after Medjugorje that I realized how little prayer I did other than going to mass. I mean, maybe 9 minutes a day or something. That it's really kind of shocking to think that. But you're I think what I say, this is really a story of a culture of conversion, but a cultural Catholic who practice your faith because you had devout parents, because actually practicing your faith back in the uh, 60s was that was considered de rigueur in America. I mean, we're in a very different America now,
Right.
but society kind of bolstered you being a good person. That's not true today because evil has become good, good has become evil. But anyway, to be a real follower of Christ, you really have to do far more than just show up on Sunday and put some money in the basket. You have to be, he said, leave all and follow me. Pick up your cross and follow me. And there will be a great reward when you cross over the border, but you may have a lot of challenges in between. And that's what happened with Medjugorje. I realized that I had to give my life really to Christ. But you know, I didn't all happen at one time. Conversion is a slow process. You have to be really involved in it all the way to the grave.
Right. Behind me, Miss Stanton, is the image of divine mercy.
Hmm.
Jesus, I trust in you. And
Right.
you also in the book, I was shocked, but you start taking art classes and you ended up painting an image of Jesus, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I
Could you
did.
share with us that story?
Yeah, that it's funny because, and I don't think I've ever said this on the air before, but I remember that when I was younger, I had always drawn and done things, but I hadn't taken it seriously. I did it. It was something you did in your leisure time and so forth. But anyway, I can remember receiving the Lord in communion, and suddenly there would be, when you're down, you're trying to pray and keep your eyes closed. I would see a face of Christ, and I would think, you don't expect me to draw you because I mean, I just felt so unworthy to ever try to draw a picture of our Lord. But many, many years later, after I'd been to Medjugorje, and Bill and I were in London and having dinner, and I went into the powder room, and there was this little Irish maid there, and she was reading a book. I don't know if you remember this book, Pray with the Heart by Father Slavko Barber, who was I say, a primary priest in Medjugorje and a psychiatrist. And so I knew immediately she'd been to Medjugorje. So we got into conversation. And then as I was leaving, she said, "Oh, and here's a wonderful devotion that I just love. Let me," and she had a sheet of paper, and I thought, "Oh, please don't give me any more devotion. I'm in devotion overload." But I I took it as a courtesy to her, got back to the hotel room and was about to throw the paper in the basket. And then I started to read it. And the promises were extraordinary, as you know, um, made by our Lord to Saint Faustina. If we said prayers that he wanted us to say, and he said, as you know, that his mercy was his greatest attribute. And so I started becoming very involved with that devotion, and it is true that our Lord doesn't make false promises. and and so I got very involved in the devotion, and then I don't know, do we have time for me? Is it's a
Tell me how
long.
you got to paint the image.
Yeah, that was really something. I had been trying to do a face of Christ, and I hadn't had any success. I didn't like anything I did, and I had lunch with a woman from the Commerce Department, a bureaucrat from the Commerce Department, and she had had. Um, she claimed she'd had a vision of Christ in Medjugorje, and I said, "Well, why doesn't he show up to poor little artists trying to do his thing?" She said, "Oh, but he does." I said, "He does?" She said, "Yes, he shows up on your canvas." And I said, "Not on mine." But anyway, just a couple of days later, I wake up at just a little before 3 a.m. and and a very strong, I don't hear a voice like you hear mine, but a very strong thought comes through. Get up and get out of bed, and you will see the Lord. And I was absolutely terrified. You'd have thought somebody said, "You will see the devil." I was just terrified. I was just frozen. And, but it was very commanding. And I finally got up, went into my studio. I always tell this story too, Doc. So funny. I thought, well, if I'm going to see a man, I went in and combed my hair. So anyway, I get to my studio, I turn on the light, and I heave a great sigh of relief. The Lord is not standing there. But now I'm awake, so I might as well do something. So I get out of the palette so I can paint. So I start painting, and I do it with something called Prismacolor, which is oil in a barrel, as I say. It's has the archival quality of oil painting, but it's actually in a pencil form. Anyway, I started doing it, and the first thing that showed up were eyes. These and at the end of at 4 o'clock, I'm doing this between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. At 4 o'clock, I felt fatigued enough that I just had to go back to bed. And this happened night after night after night. At 3 o'clock, without an alarm, without anything, I would wake up, and of course, I'd have to creep out of bed to wake up my husband. and go in, and precisely at 4 o'clock, it was just 1 hour. So about the fourth night, I said, if you don't mind, Lord, I prefer prime time. and, and this thought shot right back at me. Could you not watch 1 hour with me? And that was, and at the end of 9 nights, I was finished with the head. And it was just all I had was on an 8.5 by 11 paper. That's what I had, was just the head. And so I put it away, didn't show it to my husband, didn't show it to anybody. And then I don't know, I couldn't tell you how much longer time, but my friend Dorothy Shula, who was Don Shula, Coach Don Shula's first wife, was very ill at Georgetown University Hospital with cancer. And I would go over to see her every day. And one day, uh, she, this again thought was very strong. Take the picture over and show her.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh my, how do I do this? So I put the Lord in a black garbage bag and took it over and showed it to Dorothy. And her reaction was such that I thought, I guess I have to finish this. So how do you finish it? Your head is 8.5 by 11. And I can't, it's too long a story to tell. People have to read the book, how really almost miraculously it was finished, so that by the time it was finished, it was 7.5 feet tall. And it wound up being used because of Brother Leonard. You read that in the book. Yeah. Through a really interesting set of circumstances, it wound up being used at the first Divine Mercy uh, celebration at the Basilica of the National Shrine in Washington, D.C.
Wow. Now, one last question for you before I wanted to ask you, share with us what the MaryAnne Foundation is and why did you found that?
Um, well, the Blessed Mother's message of peace was so strong, and I thought, we owe that to her, and really to the world, to further her message of peace, and to work for peace. So the MaryAnne Foundation was a foundation that was named after the mother and the grandmother of the Prince of Peace, and uh, it was founded on the notion that unless you have peace in the heart, you can never have peace in the country or the world. And you can't have five people in Paris or Rome or London negotiating peace for the world when they have no peace in their own heart. It's first and foremost a spiritual quest. And so we developed a lot of programs furthering peace. The most successful in my mind are the one was the Kids for Peace pilgrimage week that we had in schools across the country, where we had Monday would be peace in the heart, leading to Tuesday, which was peace in the home. Tuesday led to Wednesday, which peace in the country, or peace in the community, the community to the country to the world. So, and eventually we started with about 40 kids at the Basilica of the National Shrine in Washington, D.C. And we concluded we had somewhere between 35 and 40,000 across the country involved.
Beautiful. Miss Stanton, if you had one statement you'd like to share with the people who are going to listen to this or watch this interview regarding the afterlife, the spiritual walk, our journey on earth, what would it be?
That's a tough question, but I think I'll tell you what occurred to me, um, particularly, I guess, because I was looking at the terrible destruction in California, and I have a family member whose home was burned to the ground in the Pacific Palisades area, and so you cannot help about, and that was an area that had ever, it was the most, I guess, idyllic neighborhood, beautiful homes, gone, completely gone. And I thought to myself, but when you have God, you have everything, even when you think you have nothing. When you don't have God, you have nothing, even when you think you have everything.
Ms. Stanton, I want to thank you so much for joining me today for Mercy Unbound. People, I hope you enjoyed the show. Share it around, subscribe. You can get Ms. Stanton's book at shopmercy.org, From the White House to the White Cross. Very touching. I enjoyed the book very much. And Ms. Stanton, thank you again so much for joining me today for Mercy Unbound.
Thank you for having me, Doctor. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/drbryan, BRYAN Thatcher, THATCHER, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbryanthatcher.com.